when it comes to, and even if you don't read the entire Haggadah, at least the beginning of Haggadah, the interesting parts we start reading, we might fall asleep, but then we wake up and we start beating up our parents, by Dayenu, as the Sephardic custom. We're going to make a public seder. So there was a lady that called me up. He says, Rabbi, are you going to get piyascha for us to beat each other up? That was the condition for her to come to the seder. But anyways, one of the interesting parts that we have, there's actually a Mishnah that is between Reb Eleazar and the rabbis. They had a big argument. And the argument was, when we said the Shema Yisrael every day, twice a day, right? Shema Yisrael has three portions. The first portion talks about the unity of God. There is only one God. And the love of God. That's the first chapter. That's Shema Yisrael. The Hayam Shamoah talks about the fact that we have to do the commandments and study Torah. And then the third paragraph talks about the mitzvah of tzitzit. If you have a cloth, right? If you have a garment that has four corners, right? Then you have to put tzitzit, the fringes all around it. So now the rabbis held that you say in the morning all three chapters, but at night you only say the first two chapters that talks about unity of God, love of God, keeping the mitzvot, but the third chapter you don't say, because it talks about tzitzit. Mitzvah of tzitzit is only during the day, because the Torah says, look at the tzitzit and remember all the commandments. At night you can't see anything. So that's very interesting. In Israel, it's only the first two. Reb Eleazar ben Azaryah, who was, the leader afterwards, so he says, no, you have to say all three. Why? Because the parasha of Tzitzit talks about the mitzvah of remembering that God took us out of Egypt. The last verse, it says, Ani Hashem Elokechem, I'm your God who took you out of Egypt. And at night you have to mention the exodus of Egypt too. So even though as far as the Tzitzit goes, you don't have to say it, but since you have to say the last verse that talks about exodus from Egypt, and there's an obligation to say twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, so you say the third chapter too. Now he says, you know what, but he couldn't prove it. He didn't have a verse to prove it. Until a young guy came with the name of Ben Zoma. The father's name was Zoma, and the reason why they called him Ben Zoma, son of Zoma, usually you call a guy with his first name. Why do you call him with his father's name? The reason is because he never got ordained as a rabbi. He was too young. And he died or got sick at a very young age. So it says until this young guy came and he found the verse. That the verse says you have to talk about Exodus of Egypt that night too. He actually said many times, says Leman Tiskor, et Yom Tzetcha Meres Mitzrayim Kol Yemei Chayecha. You have to remember the day of your exodus from Egypt, all the days of your life. What does the word all mean? You could have said the days of your life. Why all the days of your life? So days of your life means during the day. All the days includes night too. So now he says like this, I'm really wondering. I'm like a 70-year-old man, but I couldn't prove it from any verse that you have to mention Exodus from Egypt at night until this young guy came. Now there's a catch to it. He says, I am like a 70-year-old man. That means he wasn't really 70. He was only like a 70-year-old man. So how come he says I was like a 70-year-old man? How old was he really? So the Gemara brings the story, he was really 18. They impeached the previous rabbi, his name was Rabbi Gamliel, because he was too tough. So they were looking for a new leader. They said, let's take Reb Eleazar ben Azaryah. He was only 18. So then they tell him, do you want to become a new leader? He says, I have to ask my wife. We're going to soon see why he had to ask his wife. He says, I have to ask my wife. So he asks his wife. So he asks his wife, should I become the new leader? It says, you become a leader. You're too young. You're only 18. And your hair is all black, whatever color his beard was. And he says, old people don't listen to you. Nobody's going to listen to you. So God made a miracle that night. And he actually turned 18 rows of white hair in his head, in his beard, whatever it was. And he looked like a 70-year-old man. So that's why he says, I look like a 70-year-old man, because he wasn't really 70. He was only 18. All right? So far in the story, he was only 18, looks like a 70-year-old guy. But then there's the opposite problem. If he was only 18, why is he wondering? I don't know why I couldn't prove to the rabbis to find a verse that I should say Exodus of Egypt that night, because you're only 18. You're not 70. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm 18 years old. I don't know why I can't become the biggest professor in the university, because you're only 18. You got to have a few more years of study. So he was only 18, looked like a 70-year-old guy. What is his wonder? that he couldn't find the verse. So it's a question which is a couple hundred years old. So simply learning, there's one of the commentators on the Mishnah, his name is Tosfot Yom Tov. He says he really had the knowledge of an older man. And the proof is that the miracle did happen to him. Then that his beard turned white. That's what he wants to say. We're going to go through the answer that the Arizal gives, which is actually similar to this and has a great lesson for us. The Arizal says, Reb Eleazar ben Azariah that was 18, that was his second time coming to this world. There's a concept of Gilgul, reincarnation, that, sometimes a person comes back down to this world either to come for a second time, third time, sometimes 4 times, to complete what he didn't complete the first time. And sometimes they come back down to save the generation, not because they need to do anything. So Reb Eleazar ben Azariah was 18. Who was his previous life? He was actually in the body of Shmuel the prophet, Samuel the prophet, Shmuel Hanavi. Shmuel Hanavi lived for 52 years. And then he died, pretty young age. So then if you take 52 years of his life, previous life, plus the 18 years of his new life, so then it turns actually to be 70. So he really did have a knowledge of a 70-year-old guy. And because of that, actually, his beard became white. And he looked like a 7-year-old man because actually he had the knowledge of 70-year-old guy. That's why he's wondering, I look like a 7-year-old man. And that's because I do have the knowledge of 7-year-old man. So why couldn't I prove it to the rabbis from a verse that you have to mention Exodus of Egypt at night too? Now this is very nice. We'll become Kabbalists tonight. But honestly, what kind of a lesson could we learn from this? So one of the great lessons that we learn, there are many times, we have certain obligations in this world. Many times, we think that really the job that God gave me is too much for me to do. I think he overestimated me. I can't really do it. So, and sometimes it's true. Maybe it's not very difficult for the person. But if somebody really prays hard and he wants to do his mission, so sometimes actually the previous life of his, the previous Gilgul, will come somehow get connected to him to help him. This is called the concept of Ibur. Ibur means pregnancy. Right? Me'uberet means somebody who's pregnant. What that means, sometimes you have a neshama of a previous generation that it gets connected to your neshama to help you with your mission that you have to do in your life. So that's a great lesson that we learned from Reb Eleazar ben Azariah. He was 18 years old, but he had the knowledge of 70 because his previous Gilgul, he really did stay up at nights and he studied very much. So that actually helped that his previous Gilgul came to, and that's true regarding everybody. Everyone could have his previous Gilgul connected to him. So that's a concept of Ibur, pregnancy. So then here, the Mefarshim ask another question. If that's the case, that sometimes my previous life gets revealed within me, so maybe my previous life was a wicked person. If it's going to get revealed within me, I'm going to have a double hard job. I have my own challenges, and I'm going to have the wickedness of the previous generation too. So here the Rebbe says, actually, this question is not a question, because there's a very big difference between doing good and doing evil. When you do a good deed, it never ends. It's forever. What's the reason? So in the books of Kabbalah, they explain, because let's say when you put on tefillin, when you study Torah, it's true. Only put on tefillin maybe an hour a day, 45 minutes a day. In our world, there's only 45 minutes. But because this is the will of God, right? God is infinite and his will is infinite. In spiritual worlds, this mitzvah continues forever. It never stops. That's why when Mashiach will come, you're going to have an everlasting reward. When the world to come, there's never an end to the reward. Why is there no end? Because it's limited in this world, but because that's the will of God, God is infinite, so his will, which is Torah and mitzvah, is infinite too. So it will continue forever. When somebody does a sin, that's for sure not the will of God. God doesn't want you to do a sin. It's actually absence of godliness. So that once a person gets punished or goes through certain, purifications, whether it's in this world or in the world to come, so the evil is totally erased. So the evil from the previous generation doesn't attach to our neshama right now. Only the good will get attached. With this, actually answer a very big question. The question is always asked. We believe that Mashiach is going to come any moment. Very honest question. If the previous generations that were big tzaddikim, they couldn't bring Mashiach, you're going to save the world and bring Mashiach? I'm saying? If the people of the Mishnah couldn't do it, Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't do it, you have all these tzaddikim couldn't do it, The Lubavitch Rebbe didn't bring it. Yisrael Chafetz Chaim couldn't bring it. So how could we bring Mashiach? We're little midgets. We're real nothing. So that would only be a good question if their good deeds does not continue to exist today. But if we say that whatever good they did in the previous generation still continues to be, because mitzvah would never get erased. So whatever we do is actually in addition to what they did. Yeah, so we can't bring it on our own. But because we have the merits of the previous generation, no matter how little, I mean, I do disagree with that, but compared to them, no matter how little, our deeds are, but definitely being added to their good deeds could bring Mashiach. One of the examples, that Hasidic philosophy brings, imagine you have a big giant that he can see very, very far. But then you're going to put a little midget on top of his head. Who can see further, the giant or the midget? The midget sees further because he's even standing taller than the giant because he's standing on the head of the giant. So it's not his own power. He himself is the midget, can't see anything. But once he stands on the head of the shoulders or the head of the giant, he can see even further. So we are those little midgets on top of, the head, on top of the heads of the giants from the previous generation. So that was something very simple and small, regarding the Hagadah of Pesach. What we learned from Reb Eleazar ben Azaryah, that he actually was 18, but he had the knowledge of a 70-year-old person. I want to go a little bit, I'm going to digress a little bit before we go to the next one. But actually, this concept of Gilgul answers a lot of questions. Sometimes, for example, we see somebody is very innocent, didn't do anything wrong. A little child, suddenly tragedy happens, and after 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it is, doesn't live anymore. Or somebody who's such a religious, such a good person, such a nice guy, tragedy happens and he goes away. So really, we don't have the answers to these things. I want to say, anybody comes with answers. I don't think anybody could come with an answer, unless they're like very, very great person that he could see what his neshama was connected in the spiritual worlds. But at least one of the answers, that Arizal brings, you could also, by the way, find it in the book of the Ramchal. He wrote a book which is called The Path of God, or Derech Hashem in Hebrew. So in the second chapter, it brings 7 or 8 reasons why righteous people suffer, or why evil people prosper. So it brings, we can't know why is this guy suffering or this guy is prospering, but at least gives us certain possibilities that we can make peace with it. So there's one of the ways that explains why we find, that some good people suffer, because it depends what he was in his previous life. He was a righteous person, maybe, and he came here to do a small mission. Once his mission is done, so there's no reason for him to be in this world anymore. So I'm going to share one story with you. This story happened with the Baal Shem Tov. If it's a repetitious story, please let me know. So I'll just cut off to go to the next piece. So there was a story with the Baal Shem Tov that there was a couple that, the wife didn't get pregnant. So they went to the Baal Shem Tov for many, many years. And this lady would beg, please, give me a bracha, I want to have children. Baal Shem Tov never answered her. He was always change the subject. You know what Jewish women are, right? They never give up. So last, when she was getting really old, she goes, not old, but she saw that she can't have kids anymore. After a certain age, she comes to the Baal Shem Tov's, synagogue, and it says, Baal Shem Tov, I'm not leaving your room till you're going to give me a blessing, and I'm going to have a child. So the Baal Shem Tov tells him, fine, I'll give you a bracha, but I have a request. When your child turns 2 years old, I want you to bring him to me. I want to see him at the age of 2. And he gave her a blessing to have a child the next year. She was like very happy. She comes home and tells the husband, we're going to have a baby next year. They actually had a baby boy a year later. And then after 2 years, he brings the baby to the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov hugs this kid and kisses the baby, and he says something in his ear, whatever it was. As soon as this lady goes home, the baby passes away. So they were devastated. After 2 years, after so many years, she waited to have a child, and after 2 years, the baby dies. So she goes with her husband to the Baal Shem Tov and saying, what crime did we do that we deserve to lose this child? So the Baal Shem Tov calms them down and he says, let me tell you a story. There was no crime done. Now, this is a very strange story. There's actually 2 versions to this story, but I want to tell you the version that I saw, in the Chabad books, which are probably more, because it was said by the previous Lubavitch Rebbe. So probably this is more of an authentic one. So it says in the previous generations, there was a king in a certain country that his wife was not getting pregnant. He had no child. So obviously, being a king, what is his whole kingdom worth if he doesn't have a child to inherit him? So he calls all his advisors and he says, hey, what can I do? I need to have a baby. What should I do? And he loved his wife, didn't want to divorce his wife. That's what it looks like. So, every advisor, they were thinking what to say. As you know, in every country, there's always one anti-Semite at least. So one of the advisors was anti-Semite. And he tells the king, I have the solution. The fault are the Jews. If the Jews would really pray, you would have a baby. And he brings many stories from the Bible, how, Abraham prayed and his prayers did work. Isaac prayed, Jacob prayed. He says, look, the whole Torah says if the Jews pray, God listens to them. So if you don't have any children, because Jews are not praying for you. So what should I do? He says, well, make an ultimatum. If in 1 year you won't have a child, kick out all the Jews from the country penniless, just with their shirts on their body. That's it. So the king, calls the leaders of that community and he says, you know what, if you don't pray for me to have a child, that's it. I'm going to kick all you guys out. So, these poor Jews, they were devastated. They go to the synagogue, fasting, praying. And, the way the story is said by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, there was a certain Jewish soul in heaven. And he saw the suffering of these Jews. So he tells God, God, do me a favor. Just send me down. I can't tolerate and see the pain of these Jewish people. Send me down. I'll go to, make this lady, pregnant, whatever it is. And I'll go to the body. Okay? God listens. Anyways, the next year, she gives birth. But because this kid was created or was born by the prayer of the Jewish people, he was a very special kid. Extremely smart. So after he went to one teacher, the teachers had nothing else to teach him. He was getting bored. When he came out to be like a teenager, there was nobody that could teach him anything. He was like a genius. Anyway, so he gets bored and he's complaining to his father. So the father hears that he's a priest. He's a priest that is a strange guy, but really has endless amount of knowledge. Now he calls the priest and he says, hey, I heard you're a great person. I wanted to become a teacher of my son. So the priest says, I don't have a problem, but I have one condition. There are 2 hours a day that I really talk to God. I have to be in my room all alone. Nobody can come in. I need those 2 hours for myself. If you can provide me a private room that I can have 2 hours with myself, I could teach your child. Okay, the king says, why not? So he comes and starts teaching the kid. And his knowledge was, tremendous. As much as he was teaching the kid, he had more to teach the kid. So one time, the kid had a problem, he had a question. And also he was curious, what does this guy do? How did he talk to God in his room for 2 hours? So he breaks in and he walks into there. What does he see? The guy is wearing a talit and he has tefillin on his hands and on his head. He was actually a Jew. But as in old Europe, there were times that it would force Jews to convert to Christianity, otherwise they would kill them. So a lot of them ran away. Some of them that couldn't run away from the country, so externally they became Christians. But really deep down they stayed Jews. So this guy, he acted like a priest or something, but really was a Jewish person. When this prince comes in and he sees him, he gets very scared. And he says, I can't teach you anymore. My identity has revealed, is dangerous from me, you have to run away. I'm not going to teach you anymore. So then the kid says, no, I won't tell anybody, I promise. Stay my teacher. What are these things on your head? So the guy tells me, I'm a Jew, whatever. And this kid wants to learn about Judaism. So teaches him Aleph, then the Chumash. And after the guy was a genius, the Mishnah, the Gemara. And then he decides to become a Jewish person. He wants to convert to Judaism. Obviously very dangerous in that country. They were called, what did they call them? Renegades? There's a word for it. In old Spain, they used to call these Jews that converted to Christianity marranos, which means pigs, because they would only become a Christian externally. And then later on, when they were caught, so kind of the pigs, like the dirty people that they really didn't convert to the other religions. So he wants to convert, so they make a plan with his teacher that they're going to send him to a different country, that it's free, and there's no danger to practice Judaism. So he wanted, go swimming, gets out from the other side of the river, doesn't go back home, and he becomes a Jew in a different country. I don't know what the father did, the king did to the Jews. The story doesn't say anything. Did he blame the Jews this time? I really don't know. But anyways, this kid lives as a Jew for the rest of his life. And then when he dies, he's going to the highest levels of paradise. There's a certain place that they don't let him walk in. And then when he asks, why can't I enter this place in the paradise? So the heavenly tribunal tells him, because you were born, in a non-kosher home, whatever that has a very, very bad effect on your soul. As you know, because kosher becomes part of our body, whatever food we eat becomes that part of our flesh and blood. So it's not like any other sin which is external. One of the examples that we always bring, even in religious communities, if a kid is under 3, you have no obligation of education yet. Let's say if Shabbat is very hot and there's nobody there to turn on the air conditioning. So, I'm not saying you should do it, but some Jews, they tell a kid under 3, touch the button, whatever, turn on the air conditioning. Because he's not educated to keep Shabbat yet. But they never give non-kosher food even to a kid who's just born. So even let's say if they have to buy, supplements or Prosovi, whatever it is, Isomil, whatever they have to buy, they make sure that it's kosher. Why? Isn't Shabbat more important than eating kosher? I'm saying Shabbat has much bigger punishments for a person that doesn't keep it. Kosher has the less of a punishment. Right? When somebody becomes a chazan, right, the leader of the prayers, are you shomer Shabbat? They're not asking if he keeps kosher, because Shabbat is much higher standard. So why do they allow the kid to touch air conditioning, but they don't allow him to eat non-kosher food? Because when he touches electricity, that doesn't become part of it. He doesn't grow from it. But the food that he eats becomes actually part of his flesh and blood. That's why you have to be very, when people get married, you ask them to keep 2 things: family purity. So when the kids are born, they're born in purity, not no impurity, and also definitely keep kosher inside the house and outside of the house. Because the damage to the sensitivity of, I'm not saying become stupid, but being sensitive to godliness, non-kosher food destroys the soul, sensitivity of it. That's one of the problems that happens. Anyways, so they tell these neshama, because you were born in a non-kosher home and you eat non-kosher food, so your soul was damaged to a certain extent. So because of that, you don't deserve, so to speak, to go to this place in Gan Eden. So that this neshama cries, it wasn't my fault, I'm saying? Not only that, he actually went down to this world to save the Jewish people. So what? Because he had non-kosher food, he has to suffer? He did much bigger things. So as you know, he was judged, and the Baal Shem Tov continues that he was chosen, that he has to come back to this world and just live for 2 years in a kosher home to fix his soul. That's it. So Baal Shem Tov tells him, what crime did you do? No crime. What kind of a bad thing happened? Nothing bad happened. Something sad happened. It wasn't something bad. He only had to come to this world for 2 years to complete what he had. And then when he says the story to them, the father, the husband starts crying. And he says, I didn't know that my child was such a special child. Maybe I was sinful, not raising him as in a much holier way. What can I do to fix my sin? Now the story is backwards. He says, I didn't raise him maybe the way I was supposed to raise him. So the Baal Shem Tov tells them that what I want you to do, he tells the guy to become a shamash of a synagogue, like a caretaker of a synagogue. And your job is to take the little kids, bring them to synagogue every Shabbat, the little babies, and make sure you pick them up to kiss the Sefer Torah. That's your job. And then he tells the lady actually to go help women to give birth. And if they come from a poor family, you should definitely help them, provide for them, to be able to make a circumcision if it's a boy, or to make a kiddush if it's a girl. And he says, whatever, help them for that. And they did it. So after 2 years, this lady gives birth to another child that had lived a very, very long time. I forgot what the name was, but it came out to be a very big rebbe. But anyways, a couple of things I've learned from this story. And again, as we see from the story of Reb Eleazar ben Azaryah, sometimes in neshama, somebody comes to this world and it's a very strange life, things that don't make sense. Sometimes there's certain sufferings. He lives a very short life. So at least, from this story that there's a concept of reincarnation, we might have some answer. I'm not saying that's the only thing that answers it. And also we see over here that Baal Shem Tov actually told them a lot of big secrets. Usually it's dangerous to tell secrets that are, they're Kabbalistic to somebody else. But he told them in order that they should actually not suffer thinking that they did something wrong for losing the child at the age of 2. If there's any questions, please ask me. I'm going to go to the next part, Bezrat Hashem, very soon. And then hopefully finish by 9 o'clock. Give me 13 minutes. Any questions? The good thing in LA is that restaurants are open until 11 o'clock. When you guys came to the valley, you had to close the class. But 25 minutes to 9, nobody stays open. So anyways, we're going to go to another part of the Haggadah. I think it's a very interesting part to, yeah. Go. Yeah.
Unless you're a grandchild or child, don't they like say once you go?
I never did it. I mean, people that do it, it's fine. That's because they don't have to educate the kid yet.
You never did it yourself.
Never did it. I never did it because, thank God, we put air conditioning on before Shabbat or something. I never did it. No. But I did see families doing it when I was growing up.
Really?
I grew up in New York, so in religious families, they did it. Don't try it. But it's allowed if you do it. Anyways, we want to go to the next part. How many children come to Haggadah, to the Seder? We all know, right? How many type of sons or daughters? Anybody knows? The Haggadah. How many children? No. What's that? 4 kids. You see, the Torah says in 4 different places, if your son is going to ask you, what are these customs of Passover? So the Torah says, give him an answer. Every time is a different answer. The question is, why does the Torah repeat itself 4 times? There's no reason. So because of that, the Gemara says there are 4 types of children that come to Seder. And that's what we read in the Haggadah. One of them is the Chacham, a very wise, righteous kid. Right? And he asked the question very, very wisely. Why this type of a custom? Why that type of a custom? He knows exactly all the details. Then the Haggadah goes on to say there's a kid who's wicked. And he makes fun of his parents. Why are you keeping this, old-fashioned commandments? So the Torah says over there, you got to give him a very sharp answer. The answer is, if you would be in Egypt, you wouldn't be saved. We kept the commandments when we came out of Egypt. That's what God saved us. The other child, 3rd child, is a child that he's a simple kid. And the 4th one is someone that can't even ask a question. Is so mentally weak that he sees this, he can't even ask a question. So that's why we have these 4 kids. Now, what's the order in the Haggadah? The order in the Haggadah is the first one is a wise child, second one is a wicked child, third one is the simple kid, and the 4th one is a child that doesn't know how to ask a question. The problem is, everything in the Torah has to be exact. In the Bible, in the Torah, the order is different. The first child that the Torah speaks about is the wicked kid. Second child is a child that doesn't know how to ask a question. Third one is the simple kid. 4th one is the righteous, from bottom to top. Now, even if whoever wrote the Haggadah, right, he doesn't want to start from the bottom, he wants to start from the highest level. So the first child should be counted the wise one. Second one is the simple one. Third one is the one that doesn't know how to ask. And the 4th one is the wicked. Why did it put the wicked next to the wise one? Number 1 is the Chacham, the wise one. Second one is the wicked one. And then it says, the simple and the kid that does not ask. So one of the great Sephardic rabbis, his name was Rav David Avudraham, he asks it in his book, and he says we are counting them based on their knowledge. The wise person is the most knowledgeable. A wicked person is not an ignorant person. If I don't know what the Torah is and I sin, I'm not a wicked person, I just don't know. Wicked person is somebody that knows what the Torah says, he understands it, but he goes against it. So it says as far as the level of wisdom, we go on the level of wisdom. Chacham, the wise one, is the smartest one. Then the wicked child is the second smartest as far as knowledge goes. Then the simple kid is level number 3. And the kid that doesn't even have to ask a question is number 4. But here, the Rebbe has a different way of learning it. He says from the fact that he put the Chacham, the wise guy, next to the wicked person, there is a connection between them. It's not that as far as wisdom goes, they're very close to each other. There must be a connection. But how could there be a connection between a wicked person and a righteous son or daughter that the Haggadah is talking about? So one of the answers that he gives, there's actually a very, very deep connection. We're going to go through something. The question is, what makes a Jew, right? You can't say because he keeps the Torah, that's what makes him Jewish. Because even people that don't keep anything of the Torah, they're still Jewish. Let me ask you a question. Imagine 2 parents, Jewish parents, they don't keep anything, nothing. Even Yom Kippur, they do barbecue. They barbecue pork, God forbid. Just bring a very for a dramatic example. What happens if the child becomes religious? He or she. Can she marry a rabbi? Of course she can, right? Well, if you say keeping Torah makes you Jewish, the parents didn't keep anything, but the child is Jewish. And you can't say it depends on being born to a Jewish mom, because many people are born to non-Jewish mothers, but because they convert to Judaism, they become Jews. So it has nothing to do with the mother either. So because of that, in books of Kabbalah from the Arizal says that really what makes a Jewish person a Jew is the fact that he has a godly soul. Now, I'm not here to put anybody down. Every human being has a human soul. Anybody tells you non-Jews are not human beings, it's nonsense. They have a share in the world to come. If they keep their commandments. They're very, very good people. One of the best examples you have from World War II, Schindler's List, right? Mr. Schindler was a righteous amongst the non-Jews. You have so many non-Jews that are really nice people. Actually, you had great people amongst them. One of them, you have your mother, Teresa, whatever her name was, leaving England, going into India, helping little kids. Not too many people do that. So obviously they're human, they're great human beings, and they have a human soul. A Jew actually has, in addition to that, a godly soul. So that's what the Arizal says. Every Jew has two souls. He has a human soul and he has a godly soul. There's no time to go into the details of it, but basically one of the proofs that they bring, even if a Jew that doesn't keep anything, Yom Kippur he eats, when they would go to him and say, hey, either change your religion or I want to shoot you in the head. Like, during the times of Europeans. Most of them, they would give their lives up. Why? You don't keep anything anyways. We do find that Christians or Muslims give up their lives, but those are the ones that are educated to be a Muslim. They're educated to be a Christian. But imagine a Christian person that would spit at the church, or a Muslim that spits at the mosque. And then they tell him, what, either we're going to kill you or do something, against Islam or Christianity. They wouldn't kill themselves. And generally. But Jews, as a general rule, they gave up their lives, although they never lived as a Jew, even those ones. Why is that? So they say because there's a godly soul within every Jew. And when his faith in God is challenged, he might not keep anything. But when his faith with God is challenged, suddenly that neshama wakes up in a very illogical way. It doesn't make sense. I'm saying, like a child that can't disconnect himself from his parents. No matter where he goes to the furthest place of earth, a child is always a child. So because there's a God, this part of God is within every Jew, he can't disconnect himself. So this is what actually makes a Jew a Jew. If he's born from a Jewish mom, so he has that godly soul. At the time that a person converts to Judaism, so that godly soul enters into his body. That's what the Gemara says when somebody converts to Judaism, he's like a little child, which simply means that they have no sins. He's a new person. Whatever he did before doesn't count. But actually, there's the birth. There's a new soul, in addition to his human soul, is coming into him. This is a very hard concept to explain. I did explain one time in college. I don't know who this kid was, but he never came back to my classes. He told somebody that this rabbi is a racist. He's saying Jews are different. But again, this is what books of Kabbalah says. So now we understand why they put the Rasha, the wicked kid, next to a righteous or the wise child, because there is a connection. Even though they have two different types of lives. But somebody who is a wicked person is not less Jewish from the wise person. Or somebody who's wise, or is a righteous person, he might be more observant, but he's not more Jewish than the wicked person. They both have that godly soul. That's why I put them next to each other. If the wicked was written number 4, so what I thought, I don't know, he's not Jewish or whatever it is, just because of his parents we keep him, but you put him next to the wise person to teach that he has the godly soul too. The reason number 2, we have an obligation to bring everybody to their potential. Some people, when they look at a Jew who's not religious, unfortunately, they look at him as if, he's not a good Jew, let him just get destroyed. That's not the way it is. Everybody has definitely a reason why it's created, and everybody could reach their potentials. So when we see a Jew who's not observant yet or doesn't know anything, it's our obligation to bring them closer. But who could bring him closer? If I don't have knowledge of Torah, I can't teach him. I don't know how to bring him closer. So really the main obligation is on the person that has the knowledge to bring him closer. That's why they put a wicked child next to a wise child. So tell him, don't think you're too high. You're not going to deal with that wicked person. Is your obligation to bring him closer. So actually, that and we have seen it. Jews always cared about each other. Thank God. We should continue caring about each other. So that's the reason why the wicked is actually put next to the righteous one. I hope you guys liked it. If there's any questions, please do ask me.
Thank you.